Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I had not realized the impact of Baccalaureate Sunday on our youth minister until the first service. Yeah, 25% of your congregation leaving every year. That's hard. And of course it's hard on us. Of course, by the way, look behind you. See somebody like there's Sarah Russell. You can actually come back. You can come back. We encourage you to to come back. But my family and I had an experience of graduation this last weekend. That's where we was in Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa, with celebrating our youngest daughter Marin's graduation. But we get to keep her around, and maybe a little bit more than we'd want, and and also meant the end of college tuition payments. So there's a lot of celebrating in the Elnes household, to be sure. Now, when Marin graduated, she was surprised by her best friend from the Scottsdale days, who flew out secretly to be present with her, Shannon, and who lives in Scottsdale. And while we were kind of hanging out at graduation, in anticipation of this service, I asked them, what advice would they have for you all as graduating seniors to someone who's coming into college for the first time as freshmen? And some of their advice actually sounded awfully similar to the advice you guys just gave to incoming freshmen in high school. Maybe these are just good life principles. But they said this. They said, first of all, embrace your failures. I think we heard that. Don't be so hard on yourself when things go not the way you anticipated. Push yourself, get out of your box. We think we've heard that. Make use of all the available resources that are there in college. There's a lot, professors and service groups and so forth. And if you can, study abroad. Get way out of your box too. I know that was personally the best thing I ever did in college, was to study abroad for a semester. Now, I was surprised, though, that how readily both the girls and you said, their first piece of advice was embrace your failures. And here, John, that was his first piece of advice. When they said that, actually, Melanie said, my wife, that was my advice. That would have been my biggest advice. And that was already the advice that I was thinking about for this Sunday. I thought, if I had one wish for you, it would be this. I wish for you a handful of delicious failures. Delicious failures. Now, failure is something that you never want. You never welcome. You say, hey, can I fail a little bit? But oftentimes in hindsight, it is those failures that actually gift you in particular ways, or have the potential to gift you. I was gifted a lot in college. I think about times, for instance, there's one class, calculus. To this day, I took calculus. I cannot tell you what calculus even is. I was doing so badly. It was the first class I ever took pass-fail. And I always thought, you take classes pass-fail. Whoever does that? Well, I'm that guy, now. But that also taught me some humility. It also taught me that you don't have to be great at everything, that there are some things you can just acknowledge you just suck at, and it's okay. All right? I think about a class that I was actually getting straight A's in that I had to drop at the midterm, because I just could not handle the course load. And I had to realize that, if you want to be good at some things, you can't then try to be good at all things, or it will break you. Very helpful advice, very helpful learning, but hard when I learned it. And of course, in the dating department too, there were some successes and miserable failures as well. Got dumped a couple times. I dumped a couple times, and but through each one of those, though, I learned more about who I am, and also the kind of person I was looking for in life. And quite frankly, if those relationships had worked out, I would not have been open to when I was later graduated and working on the herring grounds of the Bering Sea. I would not have been in the position to marry this sexy beast here. So failure can be a good thing, can work for you. And so I wish upon you a number of delicious failures. Now, curiously, when I think about some of the best advice that comes from our faith tradition, it's not too far apart from that. I think about the Apostle Paul, for instance. If Paul were standing right here offering you guys his best advice, I think it would be this. To remember, this is to quote Paul, we know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to God's purpose. Not some things work together, but all things. That's a pretty outrageous statement when it comes down to it, because all of us already, you have enough life experience to know that life does not always go your way. And sometimes life actually hits you really hard, and there are probably experiences you've already had that you would never, ever, ever wish to relive if you could possibly help it. And that does not change as you age. But Paul says all things, the good stuff and all that other stuff, work together for good, potentially. But he's got some caveats that are behind that. So I want to kind of work our way into this strange piece of advice a little bit by considering the end of the statement and working forward, actually. So he does have these caveats. He doesn't say that just this happens all the time to everybody. He actually, first of all, we're going to look at, he says, for those who are called according to God's purpose. Now, God calls everyone to a purpose, so that doesn't leave anyone out. But that doesn't necessarily strike us as like this unusually joyous statement. Okay, if you're called according to God's purpose, what does that really mean? I mean, most people in America, when they think about, okay, let's work to succeed at following God's purpose, what do they think of? Do they think about doing something really wonderful and radical and exciting and fulfilling? Or in their minds, are they thinking something more like, well, this? We tend to have this idea that serving God is something that is off to the center of who we are and what we're about. Like, in a sense, the more pain we can endure, the more like it glorifies God. But I think all of you who are graduating have been around here long enough to know that that's not the approach we understand at this place. When we talk a lot about serving God's purpose, we talk oftentimes about sweet spots. Tennis rackets, baseball bats, cricket bats, golf clubs, they all have sweet spots. And on a tennis racket, the sweet spot is that part of the racket that's just slightly off-center, where the vibrations caused by the impact of the ball exactly cancel each other out, right at that sweet spot, so that when you hit the ball, 100% of the motion behind your hand actually gets translated into sending the ball over the net and also sending the ball in the most accurate direction. That's a sweet spot. And all of us have a particular tuning, a tenor that was given to us before we were born, a sweet spot inside our souls, a way of belonging in the world, such that when we're actively engaged in that way of belonging in the world, it feels like hitting that sweet spot. That's what it means to follow the calling of God, is to dedicate yourself to following that which brings you most fully alive in this world. You found your sweet spot when what you're doing, your way of being in the world, is pleasing to you, pleasing to God, and is also in some way healing or helpful to your neighbor. Now, it's not always pleasing to your neighbor, though. In fact, sometimes you can piss people off when you're following your sweet spot. I think about, for instance, last night when Sue Monk Kidd came and talked. She just wrote a book called The Invention of Wings, which is a historical fiction based on two real people, the Grimke sisters. The Grimke sisters were people who lived in the early 1800s, and they were on fire with the love of God. And now, that doesn't really look like on fire with the love of God. It's the fierce love of God. But they were amazing sisters, because they were the very first women in America to link women's suffrage, that is equality for all women, with the abolitionist movement. Linked them together, saying this is one and the same thing. This is about God's call. This is the greatest call of God in our time, in our day, was this. And of course, in 1803, didn't exactly make them the most popular people on the block. And so they got in a whole lot of trouble because of this. But they're following that sweet spot and working to heal their neighbor, including their slave-holding neighbors. It takes a lot of spiritual toil to abuse other people. So they're working for the healing. That's a sweet spot. That's what it means to serve and love God. That's the first part of Paul's statement. But he also says, all things work together for good for those who love God. There's something about the love of God that has to be there. Otherwise, all bets are off. The implication is if you don't love God, well, then the first statement does not necessarily apply. All things work together for good. Now, that may sound a bit exclusionary, right? Only for those who love God. Well, bear in mind, first of all, that God loves everyone. God's love goes out. It is completely non-exclusive. God loves everybody, but not everybody loves God back. It takes two to tango in this world. And so for this to work for people who simply have no love for God, it would make us, it's basically saying, I don't want to love God back. It would basically make us all robots. Like I'm going to do all this stuff in your life, even though you don't want it. No, I don't want it. I have no will for that. Oh, I'm going to do it anyway. So there has to be something, say, the part of us that says, I want this relationship also. Now, bear in mind, too, that not everybody who says, they're, big on God, really is so big on God. You remember, just take, for instance, the days of slavery. There are a lot of people who justified slavery, saying, hey, I'm really big on God, I love God, right? But not really. And there's a whole lot of people who would espouse no belief in God, and yet they seem to be responding to a soul energy that is very much in love with God's purposes and God's nature and so forth. But you don't want people who are not acting in accordance with God's that sweet spot of life, that flow of love. Would you want God making all things work together very well for slave owners? Or think about our own modern days. If we say, well, God may love me, but I love money more than God. Do you want that person, all of their activities to make money fruitful? We had a whole economic system collapse within when you entered high school, right? Because people were loving money more than God, and would you want God helping and aiding, abetting the kind of sick system that produced that? So we don't want God this working for people and ways of being in the world that do not do justice and love kindness, offer compassion and empathy for others. Now, the word God that Paul uses there helps us understand this a little better. He uses this word agape. The Greeks had a lot of different words for love, but this one in particular he used is agape. And what does agape mean? For those who agape God. Well, the classic definition of agape love is self-giving love. But I'll warn you, there's a trap here. Because self-giving love in today's society is interpreted as that bang your head against the board, right? It's like, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to me or my own needs. I'm just going to pay attention to something that has no interest in me or my own needs or whatever, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to give myself. And isn't this going to be wonderful? No, it's going to be terrible. That's not the way self-giving love works. I'll give you an example of how, at least it had worked in my life during my college days. I had sensed a call to ministry in my senior year of high school, and it scared the crap out of me. And I was convinced that there's no way I would be capable of being a minister, and so I intentionally ran from that sense of call. I enrolled in a secular college, majored in economics to try to steer myself towards the business field. And I ran. I pulled extremely hard trying to say no to this sense of call. But in my junior year, finally, after 3 years, I finally gave in. But the reason why was because the harder I pulled away, the more I could feel that joy calling me to look at this path. And so finally when I gave in, I actually gave in for myself. I said, well, this may be God's will for myself, but I kept saying it's not my will for me. But finally I'd say, you know what? I'm going to do this in my own self-interest because this is what keeps bringing me alive. This is what keeps giving me joy to envision doing. And so in giving myself, I got back myself. It's really raining hard out there. And whenever you're following your sense of call in life, your call is normally greater than you are. It invites you to live a bigger life than you feel personally capable of doing. And there's the key to the self-giving part. You got to turn to God because you need the help. So you finally say, okay, I need this for me, and I can't do this on my own, so help! And it comes, and it comes, and it comes, and it comes. God, neighbor, self. It pleases you, it pleases God, and it heals the world in some way, helps the world in some way. This is, in a sense, this is sweet spot love. This is, the kind of love that you're asked to love God with is to find that sweet spot and commit to that. God has placed that joy within you. Act in that center of joy that brings that ball, the ball of life over the net. And you are loving God with agape love. So when you start doing that, that's when you discover the magic of Paul's statement. That truly all things begin to work together for good. That's not to say, though, oftentimes we don't hear that phrase. We think all things work for good. That's not what Paul said. Like as if, okay, here's this really bad thing in my life, but now, that's really good in disguise. No, sometimes bad things are just really bad. You will probably die having some things that you will look back on and say, these were bad things, and I never called them good. And so that's not what Paul is saying. He acknowledges there's some really bad stuff that can happen in life. But he says when you keep turning that over to this higher power and finding that sense of sweet spot, trying to sense what is this way of being in the world that brings me most fully alive, that's pleasing to me and God and heals the world, what happens is all things begin to work together for good. The good and the bad and the ugly all begin to work in a way where the totality actually is what does it, what works for good. That word together in Greek is synerge, from which we get the word synergy. An atom bomb works on the principle of synergy. If you release 10 atoms just alone, they produce 10 units of energy, but if you release the energy of 10 atoms all at once, creates 100 units of energy. That's the power of synergy. What Paul is saying is when you turn your life over to that higher power, letting that higher power stitch these things together, keep trying to find that sweet spot, life begins to work explosively for good in a sense. And think about this, that raw image of the sweet spot. If you're going to become Andre Agassi or Venus Williams, think about all the hours they spend in tennis trying to hit that sweet spot. And what if they're going to say, well, I'm only going to practice when I hit the sweet spot right. And that's it. You think about all the times they completely whiff the ball, all the times they hit it with the side of the racket off to the center, on the work that goes into that. But they kept sensing looking for that sweet spot. Kept hitting through wins, through losses, and so forth. And gradually they become the great players of the world that they became. It's all that practice began to work together for the good. So in a sense, to understand the process of synergy, it's really about focusing on that calling, that sweet spot, and orienting your life around it. Keep committing to that piece and allowing then the whiffs and the hits to work for the greater good of your life. 5 years ago when you guys were just entering high school, the band OK Go illustrated, I think, the principle that Paul is getting us at in the following video. Perhaps you've seen it. Agape plus Synerge. That's a principle of how those bad things and the good things come together and stitch together in God's love for a higher purpose. As you enter college, you will undoubtedly have days where you feel like a rock star. You'll have days where the sun just seems to be coming up over you, shining brightly upon you, and the world is cheering on your every move. And then there's going to be times when, well, like everything seems to be crashing down around you. There'll be times when the foundations, the things that you thought were stable in life, as you become introduced to new ideas and new experiences, actually fall over completely and disappoint you completely. Your world begins to spin around, and you discover that picture that you had of life that seemed to work so well actually has been blown into tiny bits. All of those experiences are experiences you'll likely have in college, and also not just in college, but in the rest of life. And it blows you back, and yet if you realize this principle that Paul's trying to get us to remember, that when we turn this over to this great love that keeps on holding its hand out with us, and we actually join that hand, let it stitch together the good, bad, and the ugly for life, keep trying to find that way of being in the world that brings you alive most fully, that pleases you and God and heals the world. When you keep doing that, there's a way that bringing it all together, and making it to act for that higher purpose, for explosive good. And then your parents show up and we all cheer you at graduation saying, what a wonderful thing you did. And when a life that's been well lived on earth, with plenty of experiences of the good and the bad and the ugly, keeps turning it over and keeps trying to live according to that place that God put within us, the host of heaven is there to cheer as well. Amen.